Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we start this Avodah Zarah daf Mem Ches. We are going to begin on Mem Ches Amud Aleph, the very top line by the new Mishnah. Says the Masnisin. So we were learning in the previous daf three different types of houses, three different types of avanim, stones, and now we're going to talk about shalosh asheros, three different types of trees which are typically for Avodah Zarah. So shalosh asheros hain. Ilan shenatum etchilo shemenos gechavim harizu asur. If you have a tree in which it was initially planted for the sake of being an idol worship tree, then it is certainly asur until as Rashi says. A second category is gido upisloi l'shem avodas gechavim. Let's say he chops it. He chops out, let's say, the branches for the sake of avodas gechavim, namely its new growth. The hichlif noitel mashe hichlif. So regarding the branches that are regrown, noitel mashe hichlif, you can just cut off the new branches, and by doing that, as Rashi says, v'sarfo kedin ashera, since the intention was for worshipping the new branches, once you cut those off and burn them, then the actual ikar of the tree is mutter bahana. And then lastly, the Mishnah says, hemet tachtel v'eskachavim, let's say you put an idol underneath that tree, but not once you basically take the idol away, harzu muteras. So it's only usher while the idol is physically there, because you're not really using the tree per se as an idol, but rather you're using it for the shade of the idol, almost as some type of sanctuary for the idol. And therefore, once the idol is removed, then the tree is fine. Okay, so on this the Gemara says, Amri debe Rav Yanai v'hu shehivrich ve'hirkiv begufoi shel Elon. This is referring to when he grafted the and he layered the branches on the actual tree. In other words, this is referring to the second level of the Mishnah that says of Gidul Pislo, that you chopped off the branches in order for its new growth be used for Avodah Zarah, that all you need to do is take those new growth and burn them. That's in a situation, again, where you took the layers of branches and you grafted them onto the tree. Avhanan Gido Upiso Tanan. This seems to be even more inclusive, our Mishnah, because this is telling us it's only if you grafted it, which is mashma, if all you would have done was chop down the branches in order for the new ones to have grown, that would also work, as Rashi says, Misho Maisa Porta, even a smaller action, such as removing the branches, which makes it recognizable that the purpose of you doing so was for the new branches for Avodah Zarah, that would be enough. You don't actually have to do this whole process of grafting it onto the tree. Ella Ianmar to Rabbi Yanai Inyan Bitalitmar. The truth is that our Mishnah is also coming to conclude that also would constitute as the second level of an Asherah, in which you would have to burn those new growths. But the question is when you want to mavatal the tree so that it becomes mutter. The avagav, the hivrich, v'hirkiv, begufa shel Elon, that even if you're dealing with a situation where you did something so strong, this maisa of grafting, nonetheless, kinata mashihichlif shaperdami. All you need to do is remove those growths, and that would be enough to matter the ikr of the tree. Since you did this much more intense process of grafting onto the tree, it's almost like the first case, like it's almost like a new tree, and therefore the whole tree becomes usher even afterwards. Kamal Shmuel, and that's the chiddush. So Omer Shmuel. So on this Shmuel says, let's say you have an individual who bows down to a tree. So the din is toisafteha asura. The additions to the tree later on are also asur. So even let's say you bow down to a tree, which of course that shows that's an Asherah and that's Avodah Zarah and asur, but let's say this was only done a few years ago, and all of a sudden the tree grew substantially. So those new growths are those considered to be usher because they weren't there at the time of the bowing down. So the Gemara is telling us, the Chiddush, that this is also usher. So Masav Rabbi Eliezer, Gidu Pisu Avodas Kochavim. So what do we learn in our Mishnah? We said if a person would chop down the branches for the sake of Avodas Kochavim, v'hichlif, and then the new branches grow, and then therefore you have these new branches. So notomash hichlif. The Mishnah just says you just have to remove those new branches, cut them down, and that's it. And then you can get rid of them, burn them like you're supposed to do with any Avodah Zarah, destroy them. And then the tree's mutter. Gidu pisel in. That's only because you actually chopped off the original branches. Lo gidu pisel lo. But if you didn't do anything, then apparently that wouldn't be the din. Now that you didn't break the branches off, that should actually be mutter. It's only because you broke off the branches in order for the new ones to grow for Avodah Zarah, which is mashma. If you would have done nothing, then the new growths would be mutter. So how could Shmuel say that if you bow down to a tree, that the additions are later on should be also? So Shmuel, Hamani Rabbanan he. This is like the Rabbanan, says Rashi. The Polgul had Rabbi Yehuda. It's actually machlokas. So there's a machlokas. If let's say the tree was originally planted stam, however, only afterwards it was used for Avodah Zarah, the question is it mutter or not? So according to the sheet, that's mutter. Therefore, the notion is, which is what we just said before in the original in the Havamina, the Madatema, is that the fact that you chop down those branches and you're having new growths, that new growth is ki'ilu, like it was planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah. And therefore that's the reason why it's usher. And that's the reason why, again, he's strict. So Maskav Rabashi, but Tosefes Pligi, why should we say that again the whole machlokus, if it was planted stam and then only was soif avdu, and the whole machlokus is what do they argue about the Tosefes, and therefore the whole question is therefore the Tosefes is ki'ilu, like it was planted specifically for Avodah Zarah. Dilma Tosefes they call aser. Maybe the aftergrowths, even the Rabbanan, everyone agrees that that's aser. Maybe the whole machlokus is yikura pligi when it comes to the root of the tree itself. That even the root of the tree itself is also diksiv, because the pasuk says vashrei hem tisrafun be'esh. Now, why does it say ashrei hem? We're talking about one tree. So Rashi says trei mashma. The fact that it's written in plural is mashma too. Says Rashi, that it doesn't make any difference if it was planted originally for Avodah Zarah, or even if it was originally planted stam, but then later used for Avodah Zarah. Nonetheless, the pasuk still says that you have to burn it, and therefore it's not just talking about the aftergrowths. Maybe everyone holds the aftergrowths afterwards are considered to be usher. However, the root of the tree, according to this shita, even that is usher because it says vashreihem. Rabbanan Sabri Iker Elin Shari. No, the actual root of the tree itself is mutter. Dechsiv Vashreim Tigudeun. So they learn out this pasuk as Rashi points out. Let's just continue this. Ezu Elin Shigidu Aser Vikuru Shari. It's telling you that the branches are usher. So what is the case where if it's a tree for Avodah Zarah, the whole thing should be usher? So how do we split it that the branches are usher, but the ikr is mutter? It must be Haviyamer Elin Shenata Wasayf Avdu. That's what the pasuk is coming to tell you. But the pasuk does say Vashreihem. Says Rashi, V'imishim Vashreihem Tisrufun Demash B'Kol Elam Minatum B'Chil Kach Kaimer. That's it's actually, again, it's only talking about a situation where the whole tree has to be destroyed, even the ikr. But that's when the tree was initially for Avodah Zarah. The Hayloshan Rabim Dikra Akol Ashero Shib Artsachem. All it's coming to tell you is not, even though we're only dealing with one tree, but it means all types of trees just like this. So therefore, it's written Lashon Rabim not to tell you, oh, it's coming to include not only a tree which is for Avodah Zarah initially, but even a tree which was not, and then later on for Avodah Zarah. No. When it's a tree which was planted stam and then later for Avodah Zarah, so in that situation, the ikr will not be aser. So why didn't we say that answer? Why didn't we say the whole machlokus between these two shitas is regarding Tosefes, but why don't we say that they all agree by the Tosefes it's aser? However, by the whole machlokus is whether the roots of the tree itself are aser. So why didn't we say that? So hadalo matarsinan hachi epach rabbanan or Rabbi Yosef Yehuda rabbanan. So says Rashi, we never saw explicitly Rabbi Yosef Diov Taima Me'ashreihim Tigadeun. We never actually saw his interpretation of this pasuk. The Rabbi Yosef Ashreihim Tishbim Eish Nasav Talmud Milsa Yanan Hu Dekashulan Hamaboyel Natum Dechil Lakach. So and then we established it Ashreihim Tigadeun Hilkach Apich. Terutzo Rabbi Yosef Teretzes ve'Ima Rabbi Yosef Ashreim Tishrafun be'Eish Mashmal Shnarabim. Okay, so Im Kain Gidu Vupislu Mankatani. So when it says regarding this idea that the extra growth everyone holds its aser, so how do we understand when it says Gidu Upislu? That as we said in our Mishnah, that when it comes to the branches that are cut off, so of our Mishnah, the chil lo gidu, which is, as we said, the diak of our Mishnah is only because you did a maisa, at least you did a maisa porta, you did something. If you did nothing, then those branches would be mutter, the aftergrowth, right? So man ketaniwa. So it must be, because there must be a machlokus is on the branches themselves, on the Tosefes itself, because otherwise our mission is hard to understand, and that's the reason why we established it in that way. Because im kain gidu pisul man kataniwa lo rabbanan Rabbi Yosef Yehuda rabbanan. Again, if we're saying according to the rabbanan, he only holds the ikr is mutter, but not the actual growth. So b'lu gidu pisul nami Tosefes law. So even if you didn't do anything, even just bowing down to it, as we said, the upisul namito sefes asura, even that would be considered to be aser. That's what we're saying, but and that's the more logical shita to fit into our Mishnah, and of course not Rabbi Yosef Yehuda ikr ilan nami aser. He holds that the ikr of the tree is certainly also aser, so you definitely can't establish like him. So therefore, that's the reason why we end up saying it must be the whole machlokus is by regarding the Tosefes. The iboy seima rabbanan, the iboy seima Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. Actually, you could fit it in how iboy seima Rabbi Yosef Yehuda, kikar Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. When did he say that the ikr is aser below gidu pislo? Ikr ilan aser b'stama. If in a situation where you didn't do anything, then we say that the ikr tree is aser of gidu pislo. But if you did a maisa, even a maisa porta, going daite, then it shows the b'toisefes nichale that you want to only serve the growth. Be'ikr ilan lo nichale. So it's very interesting. It's pumfakert. Maybe the only time he holds that the ikr is also when you don't do anything. But when you do something, that maisa shows that your focus is not on the ikr, and therefore the ikr is still mutter. So since you actually did an action by removing and chopping off the branches, ikr ilan nami litzer, you would think maybe that's also usher the ikr as well. Kamashma. In other words, it doesn't make any difference whether you did a maisa or not a maisa. But the chiddush is that you would think that by doing a maisa of removing the branches, that would have been enough to actually usher the ikr of the elon, and the Rabbanan say that never happens. It's never usher. Question 1. So Rabbi Yossi says, based on the pasuk Vashreihem Tisrafun. So why does it say Vashreihem? This is question 1. So it's mashma two things. One referring to a plea which was a tree which was specifically planted for the sake of Avodah Zarah, and the other one was planted only later. And even by both of those cases, even in the case which was originally planted stam and then only later for Avodah Zarah, the ikr is also aser. The Rabban will matter in that case because it says Vashrayim Tigadiyun, which is mashma that there's a type of a tree in which the ikr is the ikr is not usher. The only thing that's usher are the growths. So how is that possible? It must be a case of not l'usayf ikr. Okay, l'usayf ibdu. Okay, let's see if there's another question over here. Okay, let's keep going. Says the next Mishnah, says the Masnisim. Ezu Asherah. So again, we've been talking about three different types of trees, and we kind of explained it, but what exactly is an Asherah? So the Mishnah explains. If you have underneath it a form of Avodah Zarah, so then that would constitute as Avodah Zarah. Now the Gemara is going to ask, we just learned all about this. The Mishnah previously said there was three types of trees. So what exactly does it come to tell us? Okay. That you actually serve the tree itself. Not that there's something underneath the tree, but the tree itself is the idol. There was this particular city in which they wished to worship this particular tree. And they found a pile underneath the tree. Rav Shimon Bodko Sagal Hazeh examined this pile, and they found that there was actually a form, there was actually an idol in it. So because it's clear that they were only worshipping this idol, so not the lehen as elon. They matered the tree. As we saw in the third case, that just as long as you remove the idol from that tree area, then the tree becomes mutter. So says more Ezu Asherah Avahanan Tanan Asherus Sholosh Asherus Hain Tanan. We already know this. We learned all about an Asherah. So Hakakamer. Shtayim L'Divrei HaKoil. There's two of them everyone understands. The first two cases we understand. It was used for an actual Avodah Zarah. Right, it was planted specifically for the Zarah, it's aser. As we saw in the second case, which we spent a lot of time talking about, of Gidul Pislu L'Shem Los Kachavim, you cut off the branches for the sake of Avodah Zarah, and then new growth comes. Okay, so Ezu Ashay, so in that one we also agree. But the third case of Hemet Tachtei Avodas Kachavim, that you put an Avodah Zarah underneath it, so it's actually Avachas Machlokas. Rav Shimon Rabbanan Ezu Asher Shenechu Bo Rav Shimon L'Chachamim. Let's say you have an idol underneath it. Now Shimon Aimer Kosh Idanosa, not Idanosa. I actually have to worship the tree itself. Ezu Asherah Stam. So Amarav Kol She Kormim Yoshun Tachtah. You have a bunch of priests that sit underneath this tree. Then to Amin Miperuseha, and they do not get any benefit. They don't taste its fruits. So why not? There's delicious fruits growing from this tree. Must be they consider this like some sanctified or holy tree. Shmuel Rafil Amri Hani Tamri Obey Nisrafi Aser. Even if all people do is say that this particular tree is something which is used for this Avodah Zarah, then that is enough. Even if people aren't hanging around and sitting next to it. It says Rashi, that's the Be Nitzrafi is a shem of a Kachavim. It's a name of some type of idol. Derami Be Shichra V'Shasli B'Yoim Edom Amru Meimer Amru Li Sabi the Pomadisa Hilchzak Shmuel. So they actually said the halacha is like Shmuel, that it's considered to be Avodah Zarah, not even if priests are hanging out there and not eating its fruits, but just stam. If they call it something special, then there's a reason why they're calling it that. Must be that's Avodah Zarah. Mem Chesam Beis. Let's see another Mishnah. We're just going to get to we're going to do this one Mishnah. We're going to stop in the middle of the daf. It says Masnisin, Lo Yoshu B'Tzila. You're not allowed to, with regard to this tree of Avodah Zarah, you can't sit underneath its shade. It says Rashi, Hait Seil Lav Tachas Neifa Ilanhu. Doesn't mean underneath the branches. Dalkatani Seifa, we're going to see later on, Lo Yaver Tachteha. You can't pass underneath it. So obviously, And in fact, if you do, says Rashi, v'im over tame. So Ella, what does it mean? It means min ha'ilan v'ha'ola hilkach lab oilhu. In other words, let's say the sun is hitting the top of the tree and it's casting a shadow away from the tree. So you're not literally walking underneath the tree, but you're still benefiting from the shade. That is also asur. Even though it's not an isser of oihol, of tuma, nonetheless, the din is that it is, you're allowed to do it. Okay. Ve'im yoshev tahar. And therefore, that's why if you sit in that shade, says the Mishnah, that you're tahar because you're not underneath the actual tree. Well, yaver tachta, you can't go underneath it. And this, as Rashi points out, is the tumah rabbanon, the im aver tame. Haisa goizeles esarabim, the aver tachteha tahar. So it says that, let's say the branches are going into the street. It's goizeles esarabim. It means that the trees are actually going into the public street. So what are you supposed to do? Because you have to walk in the street. But because of the Avodah Zarah, I guess they didn't want to cut it. But it's really a problem because there's no other way to go. So in that case, the Chachamim are lenient and say you're not tamei. Fine. So it says the Gemara, Lo yosher b'tzila, don't sit in its shade. Now pshita. Now obviously that seems pretty obviously because you're getting hana from Avodah Zarah. So Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Nitzrocha El L'Tzel Tzila. Says Rashi, the shade of shade. As if it's a very long shadow, as we're going to see. Says Rashi, Shachas v'Arvis, the morning and the evening, should sail oruch l'chol davar ma'oid. That's extremely long shadow, so therefore maybe you would be more lenient. Okay. M'chal but sail koimta im yoshev tameh, which that's mashma. Our Mishnah said that if you sit underneath it, you're tahar, which is mashma. Therefore, if it's just regular shade, which you're also, of course, not allowed to sit there, but maybe the extra chumrah is that you're even tamei, even though you're not underneath the tree there either. Well, do you feel let's sail koim to nami im yoshev tahar? No. If it's the initial height of the shade, you're still tahar because you're not underneath the tree. The chiddush is even this long shadow, you still can't sit even in that. So ikad masti law safe of im yoshev tahar, that if you sit underneath that shade, you're tahar. Pshita, you're not underneath the tree. So the actual shade of its height. Maybe it sounds like you're allowed to even l'chadchil sit there. Whoa, the chiddush again is, as we said, that you're still tahar because you're not underneath the tree itself. Now you're not supposed to pass underneath the tree, but if you do, you'll become tamei d'Rabbanan. So my time. Why do we have this stringency that you're going to be tamei? So because it's impossible that there's not to crevice of chachamim beneath the branches itself. Says Rashi, "V'nimsa ha'ilan ma'alhil al ha'takrebis ve'olav," because the tree is also giving shade for the idol itself. So therefore, because the tree itself is Avodah Zarah, so therefore you're actually getting hana from the Avodah Zarah itself, and the Avodah Zarah will constitute a tumah d'Rabbanan. So Mani Rabbi Yehuda ben Beser, he decided Rabbi Yehuda ben Beser oyim Rabbi l'takrebis Avodah Chachamim shematama ba'oil. How do I know that there's a tumas oil on such a thing? If you go underneath this tree, Shnemar, Pasuk says, V'yismadu l'bal pa'or. It says that they worship this Avodah Zarah in the Midbar called Baal Pa'or, and they consumed the sacrifices of the dead. So ma mace, just like as we know a mace is matama ba'oil, matama ba'oil. So we actually learn out from here. It sounds almost like a din d'oraisa, or perhaps this is a smachta, but regardless, we see from here that if you're underneath the tree itself, we pass by it, you'll be tamei. So here we're lenient. Now, eboilahu, avad o oiver, is avar means you, it was like b'di'eved, or oiver, we allow you l'chatchila to even go through this public thoroughfare, even though you know there's a tree of Avodah Zarah with its branches protruding outward. So it says b'diavad l'chatchila. So Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar mishmei dechiski omer oiver. It means you could even do l'chatchila. Rabbi Yochanan omer im avar, only if you did, which is mashma b'diavad. The truth is, it's not a machlokas. Ha diika dircha achrina, ha deleka dircha achrina. If there is no other way to go, so we're going to be lenient, and you can l'chachil go through there. However, if there's other options, then only b'diavad. Ormelu Reb Sheshis l'shami ki matas l'hasam. When you reach over there, are hitni, I'm going to run fast by the tree. So hechidami idale kadir chachrin. Understand? If there's no other way to go, lamli or hitni. What's the whole purpose of running underneath it quickly? Mishra shari. It's mutter anyway. The ikadir chachrin. If you have another path, ki amar aritni mishari. That's only b'diavad. So you're not l'chatchila to run through it either. Lam deleka dir chachrina. But adam chashiv shani. So it's come to tell you that even though it's true, it's mutter. But an Adam Chashav will still try to demonstrate how uncomfortable they are by going through this. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's look at a couple questions. Question 2. So, if there is another way to go, then it's aser. If there's no other way, it's mutter, and an Adam Chashav should go quickly through this area. Okay, let's look at possibly question TA 30. Madua hutame, umadua beheter goizelas asarabi avatata tahar. So as we said, e after the lake takrobas of Zarah, umatama ba'oil, v'nimsa ilan mahil lavyal takrobas of Zarah. However, when these branches were not geyser, they're under Rabbanan, because the mina Torah ain't a matama. Because since it's obviously it's only din d'Rabbanan. Because if it's in fact a din d'Oraisa, then it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't be allowed. So because it's only din d'Rabbanan, so the Rabban heimam v'heimamru, so they have the ability to remove or to decide when the gzer should work. TB2. Asher Gazel says Rabim himutul aver tachteha. So this is the same thing we said before. Imi derech acheres aser, in derech acheres mutter. Adam chashem mahalach b'zrizus tachas ilan. Tachas ilan. You should go quickly if you're an adam chashem. Ad kan.